Hello, I am Tony Rice. I'm the father of TJ, 30 years old and level 1 autistic. I have a daughter also that's 29, currently in her 3rd year of veterinary at the University of Missouri. It's safe to say that when a family receives an autism diagnosis, that the life that you're going to live is different than the one that you had anticipated. I, for one, am truly grateful for the life that we've been given. Like my son, I was diagnosed with mild autism about 10 years ago. And for me, I didn't understand what was happening. In high school, I began to have devastating anxiety attacks every day. From there, I descended into a suicidal depression to a point where I couldn't be around people other than my brothers and my mother. At the age of 21, I entered into full-time therapy, and over time, I recovered from the anxiety and depression. I continued to drink for self-medication, though, and I became an alcoholic. As of January of this year, I am celebrating 18 years and counting of continuous sobriety. Thank you. As I emerged from the anxiety and depression, I began to search for personal and professional growth. I attended the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee Business School for 2 years, and then I jumped straight into the world of sales to mass retail. In that capacity, I was involved in product development, packaging, marketing, and sales to regional and national retailers. And within that capacity, it became very apparent to me the critical importance of effective messaging. So then where is the messaging regarding autism in society today? Before I go into that, I want to assure you that you're not going to hear me say things like you need to, or you should, or I wish that you would. You're going to hear me affirm that you can, I believe that you want to, and here's how. Going into the autism diagnosis history briefly, in the 1930s, the best thinking from the brightest, the most educated, even those considered most moral, was that individuals with cognitive differences like autism should be surrendered to the state to be warehoused so that those families could have a good and normal life. There's a gentleman named Leo Kanner. He was a psychiatrist, actually head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University. He established the first child psychiatry clinic at Johns Hopkins in 1930, and in 1938, he heard about a program being conducted by the state of Maryland where they had released 166 of these kids to families not their own. He had heard about abuse in the program, so he audited the entire program, and what he found out was awful. There was 165 babies born, there was disease, there were deaths. With that information, Kanner stood up to the professional world and he said, "This is wrong. These are human beings, and this has to stop." And the professional world agreed with that, and over time, the systemic institutionalization of kids with cognitive differences has been stopped. And by the way, it was Kanner who went on to publish the first autism concept paper in 1943. So it might sound like the autism diagnosis is kind of young, and it is. Although that paper was published in 1943, autism wasn't listed as an official diagnosis in the diagnostic manual until 1980. And Asperger's information wasn't even translated into English until 1991. Up until 2014, there were more than 2,300 potential unique autism diagnoses. As of 2014, Diagnostic Manual number 5 was published, and now we have 3 primary autism diagnoses. Level 1 autism, mild impact. Level 2 autism, moderate impact, might benefit from some lifestyle supports. Level 3 autism, significant impact, would require significant supports throughout their lives. And Asperger's is actually no longer an official diagnosis. It's been rolled into level 1 autism because that's what it is. It's mild autism. Complexity tends to dehumanize. On the other hand, simplicity tends to humanize. And for those reasons, I believe that these changes are very, very good. Fast forwarding to 2022, so how are we doing? Generally speaking, we're doing better Yet we continue to view cognitive differences like autism through a we-they filter, even though the science tells us differently. And we continue to kind of look at cognitive differences sort of mystical and magical, even though the science tells us that they're scientific and physical. And none of this is out of malice. This is simply out of habit. I've been watching this conversation for 25 years, and I've noticed a couple of things. One thing that I've noticed is that, by and large, people think that autism is incredibly, maybe even impossibly complex. The other thing that I've noticed is that much of the messaging that's coming out of the autism community to society tends to be disparaging. You have no idea how hard this is. You should try harder, but without offering specific, tangible ways to do that. There are reports of unfair treatment, again, without tangible, specific ways to explain how to do that. This sort of messaging, ironically, promotes complexity while at the same time asking for understanding, and this sort of messaging actually, by accident, broadens the societal divide rather than to bring about authentic connection. So unexpectedly to me, I set out on a 6-year study to better understand the status of autism messaging in society. I had begun doing rideshare on evenings and weekends to help pay for some tech programs that my son was attending at SMU. And as I drove, I would talk about what my passion is, and that is to humanize the autism conversation and to enable profound connection. To date, I've had more than 8,000 of those conversations. Those conversations have been with general public, autistic individuals and their families, and hundreds of experts. And through that process, I've identified 3 core beliefs. One, that people truly yearn to do well if only they have confidence that they understand how to do well. And also that people on every side of the autism conversation come at it from a good place in their hearts, even those people that I don't agree with. And third, that profound change for the better comes when we appeal to the better natures of our humanity. As we're trying to find better ways to communicate the autism conversation, new and better technologies are helping with this process. One new technology is called functional MRI, or real-time MRI. This was released in 1991, and through functional MRI, you can see autism with your eyeballs. fMRI works a lot like a lightning storm. You'll see the brain synapse fire with a light glow, then there's going to be a bright flash, and then it's going to come back down to darkness. And since white matter is the communication material within the brain, these synapse events reveal areas of white matter overdevelopment in certain regions of the brain. And this is really important to understand because it helps us know for a fact that autistic sensory intensity experiences are logical. And with that, I'd like to share with you a story about a lady named Grandin. Grandin was the first famous, widely known person really in society that was autistic. She has been recognized as one of the 100 most influential women in the world. I actually had the opportunity to speak with her about my mission on a couple of occasions when we were in Dallas. Temple was born in 1947, only 4 years after the initial autism diagnosis. She did not speak until she was 4 years old. She lived on a farm with her mom, and Temple had a great interest in the cattle processing aspect of the business. She had a very keen awareness of the stress that the animals were experiencing. With that in mind, she created a new style of cattle handling facility that was much more humane. And when she did that, she created architectural drawings that were extremely detailed, extremely complex and perfect, and she had no training to do those kind of things. Today in America, more than half of the cattle handling facilities that exist, and many around the world, have been designed by Grandin. And since she was a public figure, many research organizations over the years have wanted to study her brain, so they've done periodic MRIs. With the introduction of functional MRI, what you can see in Temple's brain is the area that's responsible for object spatial recognition. This is a region of the brain that's very active in architectural drawing. Her white matter development is 400% overdeveloped. Another interesting aspect of her brain is that in the area of say what you see, processing of speech, that her white matter is only 1% of normal development. And again, she didn't speak until she was 4, and even after that, she went through a lot of therapy for many years to overcome a stuttering issue. And again, this is very important information to have because it helps us understand that autistic impact is legitimate and authentic. That's not bad, that's not good, it's just different. Temple Grandin was responsible for revolutionizing an entire industry, and she's not alone. Einstein, Michelangelo, Mozart, Elon Musk, all autistic. And it makes you wonder, would we even recognize modern society without the influence of the magnificent autistic brain? I don't think so. Stigma. So that's been an interesting topic, is stigma relative to autism. I have spoken to a lot of professors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and I understand that person-first language is very much stressed in higher education. Has autism versus is autistic. But I have a question. If autism has a physical presence in the human brain, how could that be stigma? I wouldn't approach a guy that's 6'2" and say, that's a person that stands at a height of 6 feet and 2 inches. No. I'd say 6'2", brown hair, left-handed, autistic. All of these are attributes. And ironically, the only stigma present in this conversation is the idea that we'd wrestle with the idea of stigma in the first place. There is no stigma, there just isn't. I think a lot of times about how you're hearing this, how are you practically going to engage with autistic individuals that you encounter? So I've thought about it a lot. And autism, at its most fundamental definition, is sensory intensity difference. That's it. That's the story. I've spoken to many experts who I have encountered, some will say cornered, along the way over these past 6 years, and I'll have affirmed this. Of course, autism manifests uniquely with each individual, but you know what we call that? We call that getting to know a person. What about that term spectrum? That sure sounds complicated, but it's not. All that the term spectrum is saying relative to the autism conversation is that each individual is unique. Are we supposed to find that surprising? I don't have to identify every anomaly or imperfection within your being before I get to say that I know you. And yet, out of habit, not out of malice, we continue to project this impossible expectation onto individuals with autism. So I'd like to tell you another story. This one's about a girl named Amanda. When my son was in school, in elementary school, there was a big movement among prominent autism organizations about the topic of cure. This really bothered me because it sounded a lot like eradication, and it still does. So I cranked up my AOL modem, and I started searching for people who were stubborn about that topic like I was. And I located a group out in New York called GRASP. GRASP was an organization of adult autistic individuals, and they were considered to be radical at the time. Their mission statement was something to the effect of, stop trying to cure us, we're not sick. So I called up their leader, a guy named Michael John Carley. He was a Broadway playwright. His son had been diagnosed with autism, and about a week later, he too was diagnosed with autism. So we had a conversation, we saw eye to eye on this, and it meant a lot to me because I felt like I wasn't alone in my extreme stubbornness on this issue. GRASP had a number of chapters around the Northeast. They also had a website that featured some excellent autistic writers. One of those writers was a girl named Amanda. Amanda had been so impacted by her autism as a child that stimming in a corner alone was her happy and good place on planet Earth. She didn't have open and obvious connection with her family, really, or with experts, and there was an assumption that there wasn't a whole and complete person there. As Amanda continued to grow and change, her brain continued to grow and change too. And over time, her sensory intensities lessened, and this isn't uncommon. As Amanda began to write, she didn't just write technically well. She wrote on every level of emotion. In other words, she was whole and complete, and she always had been. Even though those closest to her didn't think so. And so it just reminds us again that no matter what level of impact an autistic person might have, that person in front of you is whole and complete on every level, in every way, every time, no exceptions. In other words, that person in front of you is you. And even if there are no obvious or apparent signs of communication, we can still know that that person in front of us is whole and complete with human dignity, and we can be comfortable in that space with them. So as I've been working on this Autism Simplified message, I've been afraid of this message for a long time. I would think, how are level 3 autism families going to receive a message that is optimistic, even celebratory about autistic people? So over these years, I've been able to talk with a lot of these families at this point, and I always ask the same question. I say, does your son or daughter, sibling, whoever, do they move towards people who are comfortable with them? And that answer is always yes, 100%. So then for level 1 and level 2 autistic individuals, this message of Autism Simplified, it's really about increasing opportunities for career, for vocation, for leisure, for relationship, for speaking to conferences, law enforcement conferences, medical conferences, any conference where people encounter autistic people regularly. And for level 3 autistic people, this message can be about you. That you can be one of those people who makes life comfortable, safe, and accepted for level 3 autistic people. And when that happens, it doesn't just make their day, it makes your day too, and that's a guarantee. So in closing, clearly, we've made progress in the area of autism messaging in society. And friends, I'm convinced that we're ready to take the next major step forward beyond encounter to profound connection. Today we understand that every brain has anomalies. This is not to say that we're all alike. This is to say that we're all unique, perfectly imperfect. People, we're all fish swimming in the same fishbowl, and that is a glorious realization. All that's left to do is to relax, to accept, to embrace, to connect with, and to celebrate each other for precisely who we are. Thank you.